I want to talk in this session about major prophecies from major prophets. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time in, of all places, the book of Ezekiel. How many of y'all do your leisure reading in Ezekiel? It's interesting. I have made a habit, and it's just giving you a little glimpse into my inner world. I've made a habit when the word starts to get dry to me, which does happen, and it starts to get, I'm just feel a little bit detached or distant from it, and I'm not really processing it with the spirit of revelation. What I will do is turn to Ezekiel 1 and 2 and 10 and Isaiah 6 and Revelation 4 and 5 and all of these chapters that are these prophetic pictures of the most exalted mystical experiences. The throne of God and wheels within wheels and chariots and eyes and wings and all this stuff that I can't possibly comprehend. And so my brain just goes, I can't understand that, but wow, this is cool. And I swim in the mystery until my heart and mind re-engage. Ezekiel is a book that you can easily get lost in because it's complicated. And so I'm going to give an overview of the book that's going to really boil it down to its essentials. Some of this is, I'm trying to remember the website, thebibleproject.com. It's a brilliant resource. And it'll give you such great overviews of all of the books of the Bible in a visual way. I really encourage you to use that, and you'll see a lot of this that I'm talking about out of Ezekiel there. But I'm just going to go real quick. Ezekiel was a priest in Jerusalem during the first Babylonian attack. He was hauled off with the first wave of captives. And the book of Ezekiel begins 5 years after he was taken away on his 30th birthday. He was supposed to be installed as a priest in Jerusalem that year. Imagine the disappointment. You have to be 30 years old before you can be installed as a priest. He's hauled away at 25, and he celebrates his 30th birthday in exile instead of being a priest. He's from a priestly line. But instead, out of that disappointment, he's on the banks of the river Kibar, and he has one of the most profound visions recorded in all of Scripture. He has an open vision, and he sees a storm cloud and winged creatures full of eyes and wheels within wheels that he later comes to understand as the vision proceeds are a platform supporting the throne. And on the throne is one like the Son of Man. It's the glory of Yahweh, surrounded by glory, the platform of glory, the rainbow of glory. The entire thing is a dazzling display of what the Jews called the Shekinah glory, the manifest, overwhelming, heavy, weighty splendor of God. And he sees all of this, Yahweh on his throne. And it's meant to be a picture, a similar picture to the glory of God that manifests at Sinai. And for Ezekiel, the question is, what is the Shekinah glory of God doing in Babylon? Because that's for the temple. Only the temple can house the glory of God. And yet here, the glory of God is being seen in Babylon. So in chapters 1 to 3, Ezekiel is commissioned as a prophet. God speaks from his throne and tells Ezekiel to accuse Israel of breaking their covenant with him through rampant idolatry and social injustice. He's to warn them the first Babylonian attack will be followed by a more devastating second. Chapter 4 and 5, Ezekiel is kind of given the role of street preacher, street prophet. He's told to do street theater, to demonstrate to the exiles what God is saying and doing. He's to make his warnings effective. So he builds a model of Jerusalem with little bricks and rocks, and then he attacks and destroys it. It says this is what's going to happen. I mean, imagine if you walked by that in the park here at Austin, and there's some, bearded guy leaning over, stacking Legos and then smashing them, and thus saith the Lord, right? But that's what he was commanded to do. He's commanded to cut off his hair and then chop it to bits with a sword because of the sword that was coming against Israel, to lay on his side like a bound scapegoat on the Day of Atonement while eating food cooked over human feces, all to describe the terrible conditions that were coming. How many of you are glad you aren't called with that prophetic calling, right? But he had to, and he was faithful to do it. Worse, he was told, you're going to do all this, you got to do all this, no one will listen. In fact, the reason I need you to preach is because the word will harden their hearts, and it will demonstrate their heart is not toward me at all. So no one is listening, and in fact, Moses had predicted this very scenario in Deuteronomy 30 when he gave the penalties of not following the law. He said there's coming a day when you will go into exile because your disobedience will be so great. Chapter 8 to 11, all of a sudden, Ezekiel has a vision of the temple. It's a virtual tour of the temple. In his absence, he sees elders worshiping a large, grotesque statue of a false god. Outside the temple, women are worshiping a statue of the Babylonian god Tammuz. He sees God's glorious throne chariot leave the temple and depart out of the east gate, headed towards Babylon. And he begins to understand Israel's idolatry has driven the presence of God out of his temple. The unfaithfulness and wickedness and deeply committed hardness of heart has a terminus. And God says, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not pretending that what we have is real. And he departs the temple that Solomon had built to house his glory, which had in fact housed his glory. And he heads instead, it's like a divorce, but God is so faithful, he goes to be with the exiles. Rather than abandoning his people, he lives in exile with them, and this is the glimpse Ezekiel is given.